Welcome to Narrative Nights. Step into a world of mystery, intrigue, and suspense. At Narrative Nights, we bring you thrilling detective stories that will challenge your mind and keep you guessing until the very end. Before we begin, we'd love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from? Drop a comment and let us know which part of the globe you're watching from. We're all united by the love of a good mystery. Let the investigation begin.
Miss Marple and a finger points to murder. Chapter 1. The Picnic at Ferncombe Wood. It was a warm and golden afternoon in the village of Ferncombe, just a few miles from St. Mary Mead, where time moved slowly and secrets lay hidden beneath the surface like roots beneath the forest floor. The villagers had gathered for the annual summer picnic, a cheerful event hosted by Colonel and Mrs. Winthrop, who lived at Hawthorne Grange, a grand ivy-covered house on the edge of the Ferncombe Wood. The picnic was held in the clearing just inside the forest, where the trees opened like arms to welcome the villagers with dappled sunlight and the scent of moss and honeysuckle. Miss Marple, seated comfortably on a folding chair with a rug over her knees, looked about with quiet interest. Her blue eyes, gentle but sharp, missed nothing. She sipped her lemonade slowly, listening to the easy chatter of the vicar's wife, the shrieks of children playing hide-and-seek, and the low rustle of trees whispering secrets to one another. "This wood has always felt a bit odd to me," said Mrs. Dane Calthrop, adjusting her wide-brimmed hat. "Something about that big elm tree gives me the shivers. They say it's cursed, you know." "Oh," said Miss Marple, raising an eyebrow. "I do think trees get unfairly blamed for many things. Though," she added thoughtfully, "it's curious how often old places hold old sorrows." At that moment, a sharp cry rang out from the edge of the clearing. It came from Lilian, the baker's daughter, no more than 8 years old, who had gone off into the trees with 2 other children. Her scream was high and frightened, real fear, not just a game. People turned at once. Mrs. Winthrop, flustered, dropped her plate of sandwiches. "Lilian! What on earth?" The girl came running back, pale as milk, her pigtails swinging and her hands shaking. "There's a finger," she cried. "In the ground. A real one." There was a stunned silence, broken only by the rustling of leaves. "Nonsense," said Colonel Winthrop gruffly, getting to his feet. "Probably just a bit of a root or a stick." But others were already hurrying over, Mr. Gilbert, the schoolmaster, and Inspector Hayes, who had been enjoying a quiet sandwich under a beech tree. Miss Marple rose slowly and followed, steadying herself with a parasol. The place was just beyond the picnic spot, where the trees grew closer and the sunlight barely touched the ground. There, half hidden by a tangle of bracken and leaves, lay something pale and unmistakably human. "It is a finger," muttered Inspector Hayes grimly, crouching down. "Fresh, too." It had been cleanly severed, no ragged edges, no animal bite. It looked almost surgical. A man's finger, by the size. The nail neatly trimmed. A small scar on the knuckle. The children were sent away, though they kept peeking back with wide eyes. Mrs. Winthrop clutched her husband's arm. Who would do such a thing? Inspector Hayes rose, brushing dirt from his knees. "We'll have to search the woods. No telling if there's more to find." Miss Marple stood quite still, her gaze fixed not on the finger, but on the people around her. She watched their faces, their movements, their silences. Colonel Winthrop had gone rather red in the face. His son, Peter, stood oddly stiff, hands jammed in his pockets. A stranger, tall and thin with spectacles, one of the picnic guests no one seemed to know well, was scribbling something quickly in a notebook. Miss Marple tucked that detail away. No signs of dragging, Hayes muttered to himself. No body. Just the finger. Miss Marple tilted her head. It must have been placed here. Deliberately. The inspector looked at her. You think it's a message, Miss Marple? She smiled politely. I don't think anything yet, Inspector. But I do believe someone wanted it to be found. By now, the mood had changed entirely. The laughter and cheer of the picnic had drained away like sunlight behind a cloud. Blankets were folded hurriedly, and baskets packed in silence. One or two guests left at once, clearly shaken. Others stood in tight groups, whispering. Back near the tea urn, Miss Marple overheard Mrs. Featherstone muttering to the postmistress, "Do you think it's that poor girl, the one who went missing years ago? Her spirit, maybe. They never did find her, you know." Miss Marple didn't interrupt. But her mind had already begun turning over what she'd seen, the precise cut of the finger, the scar on the knuckle, the odd reactions of certain people. Something was wrong, certainly. But not in the way the others believed. That evening, as Miss Marple walked home through the narrow country lanes to St. Mary Mead, the air cool and the hedgerows humming with bees, her thoughts were far from peaceful. A severed finger in the forest was not an accident. It was a clue. A very deliberate one. And if there was a finger, where was the rest of the body? Chapter 2: The Legend of the Black Elm. The next morning dawned grey and still. A light mist clung to the hedgerows and drifted low along the edge of Ferncombe Wood, as though the forest itself wished to hold its breath. In the quiet parlour of the vicarage, a pot of tea steamed gently on the side table. Miss Marple sat across from Reverend Jacobs and his wife, Mildred, who looked unusually pale. The vicar stirred his tea absent-mindedly, frowning at nothing in particular. "You'll have heard, I suppose," he said at last. "About the finger." "I was there, actually," Miss Marple replied softly. "Rather a grim discovery." "Disgraceful thing to happen at the picnic," Mildred muttered. "Poor Lillian is still trembling. Won't go near the wood now. Says she sees eyes in the trees." Miss Marple took a careful sip of tea. "Children can be fanciful, of course. But sometimes they notice more than we do." Reverend Jacobs cleared his throat. "There's talk, you know. About the Black Elm." "Nonsense, I dare say. But some around here truly believe the place is cursed." Miss Marple tilted her head. "Yes. I overheard something about that yesterday." "What is the story, exactly?" The vicar shifted uncomfortably. "It goes back some years. The old folks say there's a darkness to that part of the forest. Strange noises, lights in the trees, animals that vanish. That sort of thing." Mildred leaned forward. "And of course there was that girl. The one who went missing. Violet Marsh, wasn't it?" "Yes," said the vicar. "That was 20 years ago. She worked at the Grange, as a maid. One day she walked into the woods and was never seen again. There was a search, but nothing came of it. No body," added Mildred. "No belongings. Just gone." Miss Marple's brow furrowed slightly. "And she was last seen near the Black Elm." "So they say," said the vicar. "It's become part of the village's darker folklore now. The cursed tree, the vanishing maid." "Nonsense, of course. But with yesterday's incident, people are bound to connect the two." Miss Marple gave a polite smile but said nothing more. Her mind, as always, was already at work. Later that morning, she made her way into the village and stopped at Pearson's general store, ostensibly to purchase a packet of embroidery needles. The real reason, however, was quite different. Behind the counter stood Mrs. Edith Pearson, a woman of considerable curiosity and endless gossip, traits that Miss Marple had always found most informative. "Terrible business, yesterday," Edith said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Never thought I'd live to see such a thing in our village. A finger, and no body. Can you imagine?" "It is unsettling," Miss Marple agreed, examining a spool of thread. Edith lowered her voice. "They say Peter Winthrop was in the woods the night before. Drunk, probably. Always has been a bit wild, that one." "Was he alone?" "Oh, I doubt it. Emily Shaw, the dressmaker's niece, says she saw him talking to someone in the lane by dusk. A stranger, tall, wearing a long coat. Emily's got sharp eyes." Miss Marple nodded absently, storing the detail away. "And the gentleman with the spectacles?" "He was at the picnic. Thin, dark hair, took quite a lot of notes." Edith frowned. "That'll be Dr. Grant, I believe. Staying at the old coach house. Says he's here studying fungi in the woods. Strange sort, always walking about with a magnifying glass. Doesn't say much." Miss Marple smiled to herself. That made two people with mysterious connections to the woods, Peter, with his late-night conversation, and Dr. Grant, the oddly silent scholar who had taken a keen interest in a picnic turned sinister. That afternoon, Inspector Hayes called on Miss Marple. "We're running into difficulties," he admitted. "No missing persons reported. No clues as to who the finger belonged to. We sent it off to the lab, male, middle-aged, recently removed. That's all we've got." Miss Marple looked thoughtful. "And no blood nearby?" "None," Hayes confirmed. "The ground was dry. Clean. Which tells me it was brought there, placed deliberately. But why just a finger? It feels like a warning." "Or a message," Miss Marple murmured. "Something meant to draw attention." Hayes looked uncomfortable. "And now the locals are whispering about ghosts and cursed trees. Superstition spreads faster than facts." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Yes, but superstition often springs from something real. A wrong done, perhaps. A secret buried." She paused, then asked, "Would you mind terribly if I took a walk through the woods tomorrow morning? I should like to visit the Black Elm myself." Hayes gave her a wary look. "So long as you don't go alone, Miss Marple." "Don't worry," she said lightly. "I've survived worse than whispering trees." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Miss Marple stood in her rose garden in St. Mary Mead, a shawl drawn around her shoulders. The forest loomed in the distance, dark and quiet, the tip of the black elm just visible beyond the hedgerow. Somewhere in those trees, someone had left a severed finger, clean, deliberate, and silent as a tombstone. She watched the horizon for a long time, then turned indoors as the first stars began to prick the sky. Tomorrow, she would walk into the forest. And something, she felt it deep within her bones, was waiting there to be found. Chapter 3: Whispers from the Past. The air was damp the next morning as Miss Marple made her way toward Ferncombe Wood. The forest stood quiet and brooding, a thick quilt of green stitched with grey mist and soft birdsong. She walked with careful steps, her sturdy shoes brushing through undergrowth, and paused at intervals to observe her surroundings with calm precision. She was not alone. Cherry Baker, a bright young woman who helped Miss Marple with the housework on Thursdays, had insisted on accompanying her. "You shouldn't go alone, miss," Cherry had said, folding her arms firmly. "Not with strange fingers turning up in the trees. I'll carry the basket and keep watch." Miss Marple, with a knowing smile, had agreed. She knew Cherry had a sharp eye and quicker wit than most gave her credit for. They reached the clearing where the black elm stood, tall and crooked, its bark dark as soot, as though it had been burned long ago. Around its base, the undergrowth had been flattened by the recent investigation. A faint smell of disturbed earth still lingered in the air. Cherry frowned. "Doesn't feel right, this place. Like the air's gone still." Miss Marple stepped carefully around the tree. She noticed a flattened patch of grass where someone might have knelt. Something shiny caught her eye in the roots, a small metal button, dull with age. She picked it up and examined it. It bore a faint engraving, W.G. and Company, with a tiny crest. "From a uniform, perhaps," she murmured. "Military or railway, most likely." Just then, Cherry gave a soft gasp. "Look at this, miss. A mark on the trunk, see? Looks like someone carved it in with a knife." Miss Marple peered at the bark. Just below a gnarled branch, scratched into the wood, were the initials, VM. She looked up slowly at the great black tree. "Violet Marsh," she said quietly. Later that day, Miss Marple paid a visit to Mrs. Elsie Cartwright, the village's self-appointed historian. She lived in a small, overstuffed cottage not far from the post office, with lace curtains and a house full of yellowing newspaper clippings. "Violet Marsh," Mrs. Cartwright repeated, squinting through her spectacles. "Oh yes. That poor girl. Disappeared just like that. Worked at the Grange for about a year, I believe. Pretty thing. Too pretty for her own good, if you ask me. Did she have family here?" "None local. Came from the north, I think. No parents, no brothers. Quiet, kept to herself. But people talked. Said she had caught the Colonel's eye, though of course that's just village chatter. Mrs. Winthrop was never the same after she vanished, I'll tell you that. And no trace was ever found?" Miss Marple asked. Mrs. Cartwright shook her head. "Not a scrap. Went off one evening with a shawl and didn't come back. Search parties, dogs, police, nothing. It's as if the woods swallowed her whole." She rummaged through a drawer and produced a folded page from an old newspaper. The headline read, "Maid vanishes from Ferncombe estate, foul play suspected." A small photograph showed a soft-featured young woman with dark eyes and a cautious smile. Miss Marple studied the photo closely. "Do you mind if I borrow this?" Mrs. Cartwright waved a hand. "Take it, dear. I've a copy somewhere else." As Miss Marple walked back through the village, she passed the old coach house, now let out as rooms to occasional guests. Through the window she saw Dr. Felix Grant, the peculiar mycologist, bent over a journal. He glanced up and, for just a moment, their eyes met. He gave a brief nod but didn't smile. She stopped at the gate. "Good morning, Dr. Grant. Making progress with your mushrooms?" He stepped outside. "Some, yes. Though the soil here is unusually disturbed. Animal activity, perhaps. Or something else." His voice was dry, almost clinical. "Do you know," Miss Marple said gently, "I find it curious how often people study nature when they're trying to avoid people." His lips twitched faintly. "And I find it curious how often people who seem harmless notice far too much." Miss Marple smiled. "Well, observation is rather like weeding, don't you think? You do it quietly, but thoroughly." He gave her a long look, then asked, "Do you believe in buried secrets, Miss Marple?" "Oh, I know they exist," she replied, tucking the photograph into her handbag. But they never stay buried forever. That evening, news travelled quickly through the village. The police had found nothing new in their second search of Ferncombe Wood, and yet the mystery deepened. Miss Marple sat quietly in her parlour, knitting in her lap, the fading light brushing the walls with gold. She reviewed what she had learned: a severed finger, a tree with old initials, a maid who vanished without a trace, and a man studying fungi who had a connection he hadn't yet revealed. And then there was Peter Winthrop, who, according to gossip, had been seen in the woods shortly before the discovery. Why had he not come forward? She opened the folded newspaper and looked again at Violet Marsh's face. There was something about the eyes. Something familiar. Suddenly, a thought struck her. She rose, crossed to her writing desk, and took out her village sketchbook, where she kept notes and drawings of people she met. Flipping through the pages, she found a face drawn only the week before. The resemblance was unmistakable. Different clothes, older, a touch thinner, but it was the same face. Only she hadn't seen it 20 years ago. She'd seen it yesterday, at the picnic. Miss Marple sat back in her chair, the knitting needles now still in her lap. "Alive," she whispered. "Or someone who wants us to think she is." Chapter 4: Secrets Beneath the Leaves. The woods were darker today. Heavy clouds had rolled in from the west, hanging low over Ferncombe, and the wind had taken to sighing through the trees like someone remembering old sorrows. But Miss Marple was undeterred. In fact, she was quite determined. She had written to Inspector Hayes early that morning, asking to visit the scene again before it rained. As before, she took Cherry Baker along with her, not for protection, but for her bright eyes and brisk feet. Cherry had a good sense for spotting things that others overlooked. They reached the spot beneath the black elm just before noon. The leaves had shifted since their last visit, exposing more of the surrounding ground. It looked oddly restless, like something had disturbed the soil from beneath. "I'd wager something was buried here and moved," said Cherry, crouching down. "See how the dirt's uneven? And this patch, there's a boot print. A man's, I'd say." Miss Marple knelt carefully beside her. "You're quite right. Fresh, too. And only one person came here recently, as far as I know, Dr. Grant." Cherry blinked. "The mushroom man." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Yes. Though I believe fungi are not the only thing he's studying." They began a quiet search of the surrounding area. It was Cherry who spotted it, a small silver charm bracelet, snagged on a thorny root just a few feet from the elm. She picked it up, turning it gently in her hand. "Not here long. No rust. One of the charms is missing, though." Miss Marple examined it. "And no initials, oddly. Most young ladies have their jewelry marked. Unless," she paused. "Unless it wasn't hers to begin with." They left the woods just as the first drops of rain began to fall and headed straight to the old coach house, where Dr. Grant was staying. A muddy trail ran from the edge of the trees to the guest house door. The prints matched the one Cherry had seen earlier. Grant opened the door himself. He looked tired, his dark eyes sharper than ever behind his spectacles. "Miss Marple," he said cautiously, "to what do I owe the visit?" "I wonder," she said gently, "if I might ask you about a girl named Violet Marsh." Grant stiffened. He didn't answer at once, but stepped aside to let them in. The room was small, sparsely furnished, but neat, except for the table, where papers, journals, and a large ordnance map of the area were spread out. "She was my sister," he said finally. "But I never told anyone that." Miss Marple nodded. I rather thought so. You look like her, especially around the eyes. She vanished before I turned 16. My family never recovered. Our parents are gone now, but I always wondered what happened to her. 2 months ago, I received an anonymous letter. He walked to a desk drawer and pulled out a thin envelope. Inside was a single scrap of paper. The forest holds the truth. Come alone. Miss Marple studied the handwriting. You didn't report this to the police. I didn't trust it. And I didn't want to stir things up unless I found something real. And have you? She asked quietly. He hesitated. I think so. Yesterday morning, I found this. He opened a small box and removed a faded photograph. It showed Violet, slightly older than in the newspaper clipping Miss Marple had seen. She stood beside a man, much older, stern-faced, and dressed in a suit that seemed expensive even in black and white. Neither of them was smiling. I found it near the Black Elm, in a rusted tin hidden under a stone, along with some torn scraps of a letter. The man, I believe, is Colonel Winthrop. Miss Marple's lips pursed. That would explain why this hasn't come to light before. Cherry looked from one to the other. But what does it mean? Miss Marple turned to her. It means that someone has gone to great trouble to remind us of a buried secret. A scandal, perhaps, or something worse. I suspect Violet had a relationship with the Colonel that ended badly. Possibly, violently. Dr. Grant's jaw tightened. He was powerful. He could have made her vanish. Miss Marple looked at him steadily. I believe he did. Or, if not him directly, then someone close to him. And someone else wants the truth uncovered. Why else send the letter? Why else leave a finger in plain sight? There was a long silence. Then she added, almost to herself, I think we've all been looking in the wrong direction. Back in the village, the storm arrived with force. As rain lashed the windows of her cottage, Miss Marple sat at her writing desk, rereading her notes. So far, they formed a puzzle of half-pictures. Violet Marsh, a maid who vanished without a trace. Colonel Winthrop, possibly her lover. Dr. Grant, the grieving brother now searching for truth. A severed finger placed beneath the black elm. A charm bracelet. And a photograph that no one was supposed to find. And then there was Peter Winthrop, the Colonel's son. She tapped her pencil gently against her teacup. Peter had been seen near the woods before the discovery. But there was something else, something about his expression at the picnic. Shock, yes. But also something closer to guilt. She opened her drawer and took out the photograph again. Studied the man standing beside Violet. The hair was neatly combed, the chin strong. But not as strong as the man Peter had become. Miss Marple drew in a sharp breath. What if that isn't the Colonel? She whispered. She leaned closer to the photo. The jawline. The eyes. What if it was Peter, even then? Chapter 5 Visitors at Dusk. The storm passed overnight, leaving behind a drenched and glistening world. Puddles shimmered in the lanes of Ferncombe, and the air smelled rich with moss and wet bark. Yet the peaceful look of the countryside did little to calm the unrest now growing steadily beneath its surface. Miss Marple, wrapped in a light mackintosh and holding a sturdy umbrella, paid a morning visit to Inspector Hayes, who greeted her with a weary expression and a mug of lukewarm tea. Another sleepless night, Inspector? She asked gently. He rubbed the back of his neck. You could say that. The lab sent back confirmation. The finger belonged to a man named Frank Donnelly, London-based private investigator. Reported missing last week by his employer. Miss Marple's brow furrowed. Not a local man, then. How curious he should end up in Ferncombe. Did you find anything else? A wallet hidden beneath a rock, not far from the elm. Rain nearly ruined it. Inside, a business card, Discreet Solutions, Clerkenwell. Looks like he was working on a case. Possibly sent here to find someone. Miss Marple nodded slowly. Then someone here must have known they were being watched. Exactly, Hayes muttered. Which means we've got a murderer with London connections and a private detective who never made it back. And still no idea how the Colonel or his son fit into this. Have you spoken to Peter Winthrop? Hayes hesitated. He's avoiding me. Says he's busy with estate matters. But something's off about him, I agree. He's edgy. And I've now heard from 3 separate sources that he was seen arguing with someone by the woods the night before the finger was found. Miss Marple sipped her tea in silence. Then she said softly, I believe Mr. Donnelly found something. And someone made certain he didn't leave Ferncombe alive. That afternoon, as shadows stretched across the village lanes, Miss Marple walked slowly past Hawthorne Grange. The grand house stood at the top of a gentle hill, its shutters half closed and its rose bushes looking slightly overgrown. She noted with interest that the front gate had recently been oiled, it no longer creaked. She continued on toward the woods and paused behind the hedgerow where Cherry Baker, who had gone on ahead, now crouched in the underbrush, waving her down. I saw him, miss, she whispered. Peter Winthrop. He met someone, just there, by the larch tree. They didn't see me. He was angry. Said something about getting rid of it for good. Miss Marple raised an eyebrow. Did you recognize the other person? Cherry hesitated. No, but I don't think it was a man. Miss Marple looked toward the trees. A woman. Small, with a scarf over her head. Didn't speak much. Just nodded and handed him something wrapped in a cloth. Miss Marple pursed her lips. Wrapped, like a parcel. Exactly. They left in opposite directions after that. Miss Marple didn't speak for a moment. Her mind ticked steadily, like a clock. The photograph. The charm bracelet. The private investigator. A woman with secrets. And a man with something to hide. She and Cherry waited until the area was clear before creeping into the forest path. At the base of the tree where the meeting had taken place, Cherry pointed at a spot beneath the roots. Someone's been digging, she said. Miss Marple took out her small trowel, always kept in her handbag, for flower beds, she said when people asked, and began carefully removing the damp earth. After a few minutes, something metallic glinted under the soil. A cigarette case, engraved with ornate initials, F.G. Cherry whispered, Dr. Grant. Miss Marple examined it. It might be his. But if so, why would Peter Winthrop be burying it here? They returned to the village just before dusk, Miss Marple deep in thought. She was now certain someone was trying to frame Dr. Grant. And whoever that was knew about his connection to Violet Marsh. That evening, just after supper, Miss Marple received an unexpected visitor, the vicar's daughter, Beatrice Jacobs, a shy but intelligent girl of 16 who often borrowed books from Miss Marple's shelf. I'm sorry to disturb you, Beatrice said, standing in the doorway in a raincoat 2 sizes too big. But I thought you should know. I overheard something. At the church yesterday evening. Come in, dear, said Miss Marple kindly, stepping aside. Beatrice took the offered chair, still gripping her satchel tightly. I was upstairs in the bell tower. Reading. No one saw me. And I heard Peter Winthrop and his father arguing in the vestry. They didn't know anyone else was there. What did they say? Peter was shouting. He said, "If this comes out, you'll lose everything. You should have left her where she was." And the colonel said, "She was a mistake. And now she's becoming a danger." Beatrice looked up nervously. I didn't know what it meant. But after what happened to the finger and the stories about that girl. Miss Marple patted her hand. "You did the right thing, dear." When the girl had gone, Miss Marple sat very still in her armchair, hands folded over her skirt. The pieces were shifting again. The photograph, the argument, the buried cigarette case, it all led to one conclusion. But she needed more. She opened her writing desk and took out her address book. It was time to write a letter. Not to the police, and not to Dr. Grant, but to a solicitor in London who had once handled military inheritance cases. He might be able to confirm what Miss Marple now suspected. That Violet Marsh hadn't just disappeared. She had left something behind. Something worth killing for. Chapter 6: The Second Clue. 2 days passed, and with them came a shift in the atmosphere over Ferncombe. The summer sun returned, but the villagers moved more quietly, eyes more watchful, as if the woods now breathed behind them, hiding secrets none dared name aloud. Miss Marple, however, moved with her usual quiet purpose. She had just returned from the post office, where a discreet envelope awaited her from Mr. Charles Pritchard, a London solicitor who specialized in military inheritance matters. She opened the letter with calm fingers and read the contents twice. Then she nodded to herself. The final piece was falling into place. But first, there was something she needed to do. By midday, she was back in Ferncombe Wood, with Inspector Hayes beside her this time. Cherry Baker had begged to come again, but Miss Marple had gently insisted on going with the inspector alone. There were things best uncovered in official company. They reached the site beneath the black elm, where the finger had been found. Miss Marple moved slowly, scanning the ground with her usual thoroughness. She stopped at a patch of upturned soil near a tree stump, a few yards from where they had earlier found the charm bracelet. "There," she said. "The earth's been disturbed again." Hayes crouched down, frowning. "Fresh, too. No animal did this." He began to dig, and after a few minutes of careful work, something metallic clinked against his trowel. He cleared the earth away and lifted out a rusted tin box, long and narrow. Inside was a folded cloth, stiff with age. Hayes unwrapped it carefully. Inside lay a small pistol, old but once well maintained. A revolver, the kind issued to officers in the army. He turned it over and looked up sharply. "There are initials etched under the barrel P.W. "Peter Winthrop," said Miss Marple quietly. Hayes blew out a breath. "Well, that's not something you just drop by accident." "No," Miss Marple agreed. "Nor do you bury a weapon unless it holds a memory best forgotten." Hayes stood. "We'll get it tested. See if it was fired recently." Miss Marple's eyes didn't leave the tin. "I don't believe it was. I think it's been hidden for years. Perhaps since the day Violet Marsh disappeared." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "You think this was the murder weapon?" "I think it might have been meant to look that way." That evening, the entire village buzzed with the discovery of the buried gun. Word had spread, nothing stayed secret for long in Ferncombe, and suspicion swirled like midges in the summer air. Some pointed fingers at Peter Winthrop. Others at Dr. Grant. A few even whispered about Mrs. Winthrop, who had taken to her room and refused visitors. Miss Marple, however, remained quiet. She was waiting. And that night, she was rewarded. Just past dusk, a quiet knock came at her door. She opened it to find Peter Winthrop standing in the shadows, his face drawn and pale. "I need to speak to you," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Somewhere private." Miss Marple stepped aside. "Come in. The kettle's just boiled." They sat in the parlor, the curtains drawn. Peter refused tea but accepted a glass of water, which he drank in 2 gulps. "I didn't kill anyone," he began. "I swear it." "But I think I know who did." Miss Marple watched him carefully. "Go on." He ran a hand through his hair. "The man in the woods, the private detective. He came to see me last week. Said he was looking into a woman who vanished years ago. Violet Marsh. He thought she might be connected to my father. She was," Miss Marple said softly. "More than connected. She was carrying his child." Peter looked up sharply. "How do you?" "I received confirmation from a solicitor in London. Violet filed a claim with the War Office after your father's return from service. She said he'd promised marriage. But when she became pregnant, he dismissed her. She disappeared shortly after." Peter closed his eyes. "He told me she ran off with someone. That she was nothing. But I found letters hidden in an old desk. From her. She begged him to acknowledge her. She threatened to go public." Miss Marple nodded. "And the charm bracelet? That was hers, wasn't it?" "Yes," he whispered. "She wore it every day. I found it in the drawer with the letters. You tried to bury it in the woods." He looked ashamed. "I didn't know what else to do. I thought if I destroyed the evidence, it would stop. The guilt. The suspicion. But it's only made things worse." "Did you kill Mr. Donnelly?" "No," he said quickly. "But I saw him. The night before he died. He was waiting near the old elm. He said someone had offered him money to leave town. I assumed it was my father." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly. "Did you see who he met?" Peter hesitated. "No. But I heard her voice." Miss Marple sat back. "Her?" Peter nodded slowly. "It was a woman." Later that night, Miss Marple sat at her writing desk once again, this time with the pistol laid beside her on a folded cloth. Rain ticked softly against the window pane. Her eyes rested on the newspaper photo of Violet Marsh. She picked up a second photograph, the one found by Dr. Grant, showing Violet with the man they assumed was the Colonel. But now, on closer examination, she could see the resemblance wasn't quite right. The jaw, the nose, yes, similar. But the man in the photograph was younger. A brother, perhaps? Or a son? She turned to the tin containing the pistol. It wasn't rusted enough for 20 years of burial. The wear was false. Artificial. Someone had staged it. But why? And then she saw it. Etched faintly, nearly missed, beneath the initials PW, a second set, crossed out, but visible still. RT. Miss Marple sat back. Her eyes narrowed. It was time to speak to Mrs. Winthrop. Chapter 7: The Truth in Shadows. The morning broke cool and grey. Mist hung over the hedgerows and crept across the village green like a ghost reluctant to leave. At Hawthorne Grange, the curtains remained drawn. No smoke rose from the chimney. Miss Marple, dressed in a sober grey wool coat and her sensible walking shoes, made her way along the gravel path to the front door of the manor. She was met not by the housekeeper, but by Mrs. Winthrop herself, still in her dressing gown, face pale, lips pressed into a hard line. "I knew you'd come," she said without greeting. "You always appear just before everything collapses." Miss Marple smiled gently. "I found that collapses tend to follow where secrets are kept too tightly." The two women sat in the drawing-room. It was a tired room, once elegant but now faded with time and disuse. The mantel clock ticked softly. A photo of the colonel in uniform sat untouched on the piano, half covered in dust. Miss Marple opened her handbag and placed the pistol on the coffee table, wrapped in a cloth. "This was found in the woods. At first, we believed it belonged to Peter. But the initials beneath tell another story." Mrs. Winthrop's eyes didn't move from the gun. "R.T.," Miss Marple continued. "Richard Trevelyan. Your brother, was he not?" Silence. Then, after a long pause, Mrs. Winthrop said quietly, "Yes. My younger brother. Killed in the war. Or so we thought." Miss Marple folded her hands. "But he returned, didn't he? And assumed a different identity. Violet Marsh's companion in the photograph, it wasn't Colonel Winthrop. It was Richard." Mrs. Winthrop finally looked up. Her voice was hoarse. They looked so alike, Richard and Arthur. Everyone said so. Even their voices. After the war, Richard came back, broken. Discharged in disgrace. He begged Arthur for help. "But my husband refused. Said Richard would bring shame on the family." She paused, staring at the floor. "So I hid him. In a cottage on the edge of the woods. I visited when I could. Brought food. He wanted to start over. He changed his name to Frank Donnelly. Became a private investigator. But something never healed in him. He drank. He raged." Miss Marple's breath caught. "Are you saying?" "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He killed Violet Marsh. I didn't know until years later. She came looking for Arthur. Richard thought she was a threat to our family. He panicked. Buried her in the woods. He told me on his deathbed, last year. He was dying, and he wanted to unburden himself." "And the gun?" "I took it from his things. Hid it where no one would find it. But someone did." Miss Marple leaned forward. "Someone else knew, didn't they? Someone who found out the truth and used it." Mrs. Winthrop's eyes were rimmed with tears now. "I believe Peter found the letters Violet wrote to Arthur. He confronted his father. But I never thought he'd." Miss Marple shook her head. "I don't believe Peter killed anyone. But I do believe he's protecting someone. Perhaps you." Mrs. Winthrop flinched. "I'll go to the inspector," she whispered. "Tell him everything. I should have spoken years ago." But before she could, the past came to claim her. That afternoon, Miss Marple returned to the vicarage. Inspector Hayes was waiting on the steps, a grim look on his face. "There's been another incident," he said. "You'd best come." At the edge of Ferncombe Wood, just off the muddy path that led to the Black Elm, a body had been found, hidden beneath branches and moss. The same place Violet's bracelet had been discovered. It was Dr. Grant. Lying face down, his coat torn, a blow to the back of the head. His walking stick lay beside him, snapped clean in two. Miss Marple knelt beside him, her heart sinking. Hayes looked grim. Died last night. No signs of struggle. Likely ambushed. We found a note in his pocket. He handed it to her. It read, "I know what happened. Meet me at the elm before dusk. We end this tonight." It was unsigned. Miss Marple read it twice, then folded it carefully. "It wasn't written by Peter," she said softly. "No. No. The language is wrong. The tone. Peter would never say, 'We end this tonight.' No, this was someone else. Someone desperate to stop him from speaking." Hayes frowned. "So Grant knew the truth?" "I believe so. Or part of it. Enough to make him dangerous." Hayes nodded slowly. "And the killer silenced him." Miss Marple stood, brushing earth from her knees. "I think it's time to gather everyone at the manor," she said. "Tonight. The whole village is tangled in this web. It's time to cut the threads and see what falls." That evening, Hawthorne Grange filled with uneasy guests. Peter Winthrop. Mrs. Winthrop, silent and pale. Cherry Baker, fidgeting nervously. Beatrice Jacobs with her father, the vicar. Dr. Grant's assistant. Inspector Hayes. And Miss Marple, seated at the center, like a kindly spider in the middle of a delicate web. She looked at each of them. "The truth," she said quietly, "has been hidden too long. A girl vanished. A detective lost his life. And now a doctor has paid the same price." She stood. "And I know who the murderer is." A sharp intake of breath circled the room. "The time for shadows is over. Tomorrow, I shall give Inspector Hayes a full account of everything. But for tonight—" She fixed her eyes on one figure. "I advise you to sleep lightly. Because by morning, your secrets will no longer be safe." Chapter 8: The Final Threads. Morning broke with a golden hush over Ferncombe, as if the village itself was holding its breath. Inside the drawing-room of Hawthorne Grange, the air was thick with anticipation. Every seat was taken: Inspector Hayes, Peter Winthrop, Mrs. Winthrop, Cherry Baker, Beatrice Jacobs, the vicar, and Dr. Grant's assistant, young Mr. Emmett. A fire burned low in the hearth, though the summer air outside was warm. Miss Marple sat in her usual place, knitting in hand. Her needles clicked softly in the silence. Then she looked up. "I have often observed," she began mildly, "that murder is rarely about cleverness. It is, almost always, about emotion, fear, jealousy, pride. And, very often, shame." She folded her knitting gently into her lap and turned to face them all. "Let us begin with the assumption we now know to be true: Violet Marsh was murdered. Her body lies beneath the elm in Ferncombe Wood. Her charm bracelet, her letters, and the pistol, these are not the inventions of village gossip, but remnants of a crime long buried." No one spoke. Miss Marple continued, "The man who killed her was Richard Trevelyan, brother to Mrs. Winthrop, who lived for years under the name Frank Donnelly. He feared Violet would expose a scandal. He silenced her." Mrs. Winthrop closed her eyes. His guilt was real. But he was not the only one who knew. And when he died, his secrets began to stir again. You see, he told someone before he passed. Someone who, instead of going to the police, chose to profit. She looked across at Mr. Emmett, Dr. Grant's assistant. His face twitched ever so slightly. Dr. Grant knew the truth, Miss Marple said gently. Or enough of it. He'd been piecing it together for some time. Perhaps he found the same photograph I did. Perhaps he was suspicious of why his mentor, Colonel Winthrop, never spoke of Violet, though so many letters existed. And I believe he planned to act until someone stopped him. She turned sharply. Didn't they, Mr. Emmett? The room stilled. He stood slowly, lips tight. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, but I believe you do, Miss Marple said. You see, I remembered something curious. When we found the finger, you were already in the woods that morning. You said you were bird-watching, but you had no binoculars. What you did have was knowledge of that very elm tree and of the charm bracelet. Peter Winthrop frowned. How would he know about the bracelet? Because he had found it earlier, said Miss Marple. I believe he discovered the grave some time ago and kept quiet, intending to blackmail Mr. Donnelly, or perhaps Dr. Grant, once he realized the value of what he knew. But Dr. Grant wouldn't play along. He likely told Mr. Emmett he intended to report the matter. Inspector Hayes stood. That's why you killed him. You lured him to the woods, hit him from behind, and left him like the others. Emmett's eyes darted around the room, wild now. That's nonsense. I worked for Grant. I respected him. Miss Marple nodded sadly. You respected his position, perhaps. But not enough to stop you from silencing him. When Mr. Donnelly's death drew attention, you realized things were unraveling. You planted the pistol to steer suspicion toward Peter. You even tried to mislead us by suggesting the bracelet had been moved recently. Cherry gasped. So he was the one, not Peter. Miss Marple turned to her. Peter's only guilt was trying to protect his family. He found the letters, yes. Buried the bracelet, yes. But he never killed anyone. Emmett was pale now, trembling. You have no proof. Miss Marple smiled. No? But the proof lies in your own words. You told me you never saw the bracelet before. And yet, when I mentioned the number of charms it held, you corrected me. How would you know, unless you had seen it before the police did? Emmett opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Inspector Hayes moved forward. I think that's quite enough. Mr. Emmett, I'm arresting you on suspicion of murder. As Hayes took him away, the room sat frozen. Then Mrs. Winthrop stood slowly. I never wanted this, she said quietly. I only tried to protect my brother's memory. But I see now that silence can do just as much harm as cruelty. Peter reached out and took her hand. We'll move forward. Together. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple sat in the vicarage garden with a cup of tea, watching a butterfly hover over the lavender. Cherry joined her, cheeks pink from a walk. I still can't believe it was Dr. Grant's assistant. He always seemed so polite. Many killers do, my dear, Miss Marple said calmly. It's rarely the shouting sort who murder. It's those who smile and step lightly, the ones no one ever suspects. But there's always something, some crack in the surface. Cherry shook her head. And that poor girl, Violet. After all these years? Yes, said Miss Marple softly. She waited too long for justice. But she has it now. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Miss Marple said, one must never underestimate the power of a single clue. Even a finger, buried deep in the forest, can point straight to the truth.